Sayer tried to smile, but probably bared her teeth instead. She'd agreed to do this guest lecture at the Georgetown University Department of Neurology as a favor to her old advisor. But she hadn't expected it to become the never-ending question brigade. As a neuroscientist who studied the brains of serial killers for the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, Sayer was apparently far more interesting than most neurology guest lecturers. "You said you found numerous differences in the brains of serial killers?" the student continued. "Numerous deficiencies, yes." He glanced down at his notes. "So they have less gray matter around the limbic system, smaller than average amygdalae, and less active ventromedial prefrontal cortices. My question for you is, do you believe we should be screening children for these brain markers?" Sayer blinked. It was a good, though horrifying question. She took a deep breath. "What do you do with a child with a psychopathic brain?" My answer is nothing. Though our brain structure dramatically impacts our behavior, a person can actually be a psychopath without being a serial killer. They probably won't win a Mr. Congeniality award, but that child is statistically much more likely to grow up to be a surgeon or successful politician than a serial killer. A murmur spread through the lecture hall. Sayer continued. "In fact, my most recent project involved interviewing what I call prosocial psychopaths, people with psychopathic traits that manage to channel their narcissism, lack of empathy, and preternatural calm into successful careers as CEOs, lawyers, police officers, and doctors. There are millions of people who qualify as psychopaths on the psychopathy checklist, yet have never committed a crime." She looked out at the darkened room. She could elaborate, but she knew that a celebratory meal was waiting at home. Her recently adopted adult daughter, Addie, was leaving tomorrow for a trip to check out Stanford, and her neighbor and dog co-parent, Tino, had just graduated with their dog from canine therapy school. Sayer was ready for a beer and some delicious food with her family. "I'll take one more question, and then we're going to wrap things up," she said. A dozen hands shot upward. Sayer called on a mousy young woman sitting in the back row. "You've interviewed hundreds of psychopaths. What was the most disturbing interview you've ever conducted?" An involuntary shudder lifted the hair on Sayer's arms as she thought about subject 037. "Funny you should ask that immediately after the last question. The most unusual and disconcerting interview I've conducted was with one of my non-criminal research subjects." Sayer paused, trying to make sure she didn't break confidentiality with her answer. "One of the people I interviewed for that project achieved a perfect score on the psychopathy checklist. Not even the most disturbed killer I've interviewed managed that dubious achievement." "Your creepiest interview wasn't with a serial killer?" the young woman pressed. "That's right. The killers I've interviewed were generally not very smart and tend to have an inflated sense of self. Don't get me wrong, they are monsters who destroyed innumerable lives, but they're generally more pitiable than frightening. But this anonymous interview subject was..." Sayer struggled to find the right words to describe her interviews with 037. "Chilling." "And you don't even know who he is?" a student called out. "That's right. I allowed my subjects to remain totally anonymous. Otherwise, many of them wouldn't have been willing to talk to me," Sayer said. "But psychopaths tend to be self-aggrandizing, and I found that many of them were thrilled to be interviewed. This particular subject, though, protected his anonymity very well." Sayer didn't mention that, during her research, subject 037 had taken an unhealthy interest in her life and career. In fact, he was clearly someone well-connected in D.C., maybe even someone high up at the National Security Agency. And he had used those connections to save her career in the middle of a major FBI scandal. That he seemed inexplicably invested in protecting her was worrisome. Any interaction with 037 felt like drawing the attention of a tamed tiger, a great opportunity to learn about the inner workings of a truly unusual mind.